everybody.
Hey, Angie.
Good morning or afternoon, depending where you are. How are you?
Morning, Angie. Dorette here.
Hi, Dorette. Dorette and Laura, you guys get my MVP awards.
Hey, I'm wondering, remember in our last meeting, I think Beth Gibbons shared a diagram of the data flow.
Yes.
Did she share that with you? I would love to get a copy of that.
I am sure I have it. It might just take me a minute to find it. I can send that along afterwards. But yeah, that was great.
That would be great. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting and something I wanted to talk to my colleagues here at Public Health about.
Yeah, good idea. I hope everybody was able to get the last email. Just there's a link to the video recording if you do want a chance to take another look at things. But yes, I can get some materials out. In fact, what I think I'll do is I'll add that to the shared files that I'm creating. I'll add the link to that diagram.
Great. Thanks, Angie.
Oh, hi, Leah. Leah is asking whether or not it's okay for someone else from OPR. Yep. Yes, that is okay.
Thanks. I'll send you an email or they will directly.
Yes, sounds good. All right, we're gonna probably have some other people start to roll in, but I imagine that this is a big week for vacation. I think still. I just got back from mine on Monday, so we'll see if we get a good attendance today. Why don't I go ahead and kind of just kick us off a little bit with those that have arrived. Everybody can see my screen all right, right? Okay. Yes, Tom gives me a thumbs up, and I'm sorry, it sounds like I've got a little bit of a lawnmower happening outside. But welcome back. This is our third meeting, and I just want to say thanks for coming back. I'm excited today that I get to do a little less speaking, but I do want to share some work that I have done in between the last time we met and today. Just to remind you, we're here to connect experts like you, to exchange knowledge, share tools, and generally explore opportunities to enhance some solutions for data access, tribal data resilience access. And so Shasta is actually in Alaska at a conference at the moment, yeah, in person and everything. So I don't think she'll be chiming in today. So we're missing our co-facilitator, but I do want to welcome you all. If you wouldn't mind, I think some of you know, a lot of you know each other, but would you please just reintroduce yourself in the chat, just your name, organization, and location. And I'm looking to see if there's anybody new here today. I don't see anybody brand new, although I have continued to do some recruiting. So we might get somebody from UC Merced who does this kind of work, and maybe somebody from Adaptation International. I've been in chats with them and chats with folks at University of Oregon. So yeah, I'm hoping to sort of expand on what we've got going here. And so I think what we'll do is we'll just kind of roll right into any member announcements. This is part of our standing agenda. And then thank you, Jessica, for introducing yourself. I did mean to mention on this one, our big speaker of today is Jessica Cahale from Azavea, and she's going to talk about the Temperate tool, and she'll do a little demo. We'll have a discussion around it. So that's the big event of the day. But before we get there, I do want to give an opportunity for anybody to share any updates that you are aware of that you think folks on the line that are, you know, working on data and access can benefit from knowing about.
I have a small one, Angie, that might be more for you as a facilitator of the group in the future. So I just got off a webinar led by GCSE, which is the global, I think I'll get this right, Global Council on Science and Environment, I think. And they've been doing a whole series on Indigenous knowledge meets Western science and all of the conflict, and also really great examples and paths forward of working across what has been a barrier. And they're setting up the group as a collaborative. And I just thought it might be something that's of interest to some of the members and maybe even to the group as a whole, if that collaborative gets off the ground. They haven't quite figured out what they'll focus on. But based on the discussion that I just heard, I think it might be relevant. And I can send you, Angie, an email where you can sign up for updates from them.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. If you have a link you want to share with everybody to that group in the chat box, that would be great. That sounds like the kind of thing we'll be adding to the shared file I'm going to talk about in just a minute. And I also found myself, and I can't remember if I found it, looking for Strategic Growth Council's recent guidance to other state agencies or about how to work with tribal organizations, tribes. If you could send that link along.
We don't have anything on that.
Wasn't Coral working on?
It's technical assistance guidelines, but not for other government agencies, and that hasn't been approved yet.
Got it. Okay.
My understanding. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Hey, Angie,
Yes.
this is Tom. I just wanted to say on that guidance that Leah had just referenced, just to give you an update, it had just gone through legal review at the Energy Commission. It's now back with Coral. And so we should have that in a place to release, I hope within a month. It has to go back to the governor's office for a final review. So I'm hoping that that all happens in the next month.
Yeah, okay, great. It was just a follow-up because I was going back over our notes from the last meeting and folks seem really interested in trying to support agencies that are working on this to better serve tribes, and that seemed like a big purpose of that document.
Yeah, it's a good document.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have updates from their particular vantage point?
Actually, I do. This is Jessica Cahill from Azavea. I actually attended a webinar in June, and it was co-sponsored by the Center for Open Data Enterprise and NOAA, and it was called the Roundtable on Climate Risk Assessment in Vulnerable Communities. And they have released a recording of that webinar, and I will put it in the chat right now. But there was pretty much an open call for participants to kind of give a shout out to particularly valuable data sources. And I actually referenced the Tribal Climate Health site. So there should be a list of resources that get kind of compiled and shared out of this. But I thought it was a really good webinar. There were a lot of really high impact speakers, I would say, and I would definitely encourage a watch if you're interested.
Yes, thank you. Did they spend time specifically on tribes?
They spent, I would say, a passing moment on tribes.
Okay. Sounds about right. Thank you, Jessica. That's helpful. Anybody else? Updates from your neck of the woods? Althea, I saw you sent me an email. Yes, the way that Shasta and I's time is funded to facilitate this group is through the BIA Tribal Resilience Grant.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, okay. So, I don't have an update other than I am tracking the federal movement, which is obviously complex and dynamic, meaning we know there was money coming from the American Rescue Plan. I'm trying to better understand how that's flowing through. It's starting to come out in solicitations. There's $1 trillion that Senate just passed in the American Jobs Act infrastructure bill. And then there's this other $3.5 trillion in the budget resolution. And I'm just tracking it because for a lot of reasons, but for the purpose of this group, looking for where we might see outpoppings of resources for things that support climate resilience tools or climate services, I think it's often referred to in the federal government. So I wondered if anybody else has any insights on that.
This is Dorette, and the Building Resilience in Communities and FEMA have opened up opportunities. And I think tribes work directly with the federal government, and there's local jurisdictions can probably partner with tribes also to do proposals through the Office of Emergency Services.
Yes, so you think BRIC could support data solutions?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I think there's a really broad interpretation of mitigation and things that prepare populations. All right, and assessments can definitely, and planning can fall, planning for mitigation actions.
Yeah.
Which in that context are adaptation usually measures are pre-mitigating, like things that will prevent the hazard. So they can include greening, flood, pre-flood mitigation and things like that, that also accomplish adaptation. So a lot of pre-planning opportunities that I think could help to develop data for specific communities and
Okay,
yeah.
thank you, Dora. Yeah, that's helpful. I'm sure all of you are sort of tracking some of that as well. And if you have any other information that you come across that makes it, signals that there's ready investment for this kind of work, it's not, I'm not really doing any kind of like, I'm not doing business development, but I'm trying to bring this information to the folks that might be able to work together to pull something, pull off more solutions, which is part of the goal of this group. Anybody else have anything during our member announcement sort of roundtable? And hi, Chaz, thanks for joining. Okay. So I have just my one topic, and before I hand it off to Jessica, and that's the progress I have made on some of our shared files based on our last conversation, which we had about goals and objectives of the group. And what I thought was, let me just kind of pull what I'm hearing into our shared document. So this is now a document that is sort of an expansion of the original directory. So if you have that original directory somehow bookmarked, it's the same link. So I'm just going to drag it over here and start sharing. So now we have multiple tabs, and this was a place for me to try to capture what you all had sort of said and sort of rethink how we might organize sort of our charge as a group. And so I dropped here the sort of the purpose or mission statement. That's what we've been using on our cover slide when we start the meetings. That's not changed. I did add a problem statement here because I felt like maybe we needed to get really clear about why we're meeting and what we're trying to tackle. And I would be really interested when you have, it doesn't have to be on the fly here, but I'd be interested if I captured correctly what you guys are seeing out there as the problem to solve. And I don't think I have this perfectly right yet, which is why I'm asking the Brain Trust to really help me nail this down. The other thing that you'll see here is goals and objectives. So last time we met, there were actually sort of 4 goals. They were real drafty. Wasn't quite sure how to structure it. So I've sort of reworded them, and to me there are really 2 main ones, which are improve tribal climate and health resilience data access for tribes, and foster collaborative tribal resilience data access solutions. So they kind of go together, and there might be a little overlap there, but we want more access for tribes to data, and together, part of the reason for our existence is to seek collaborative solutions. And so some of the language, or even some of the goals we talked about last time, actually made more sense to me. Oops. Shrink this down a sliver. Made more sense as desired outcomes, meaning things like, as a result, of improving data access, we're hoping that tribes can more easily access meaningful and readily usable external data, save time and money spent fact-finding, and more quickly move past planning to action. These 2 were actually stated as goals last time, but to me they just seem like what we want out of this initial goal. And then a lot of our conversation last time seemed like, well, what can we do to actualize that goal? So what are our, what are our actions? And so I made a column for objectives, and that's where I'm sort of starting to list out some of what we talked about, like identifying key tools and solutions and evaluate their usefulness to tribes, and to identify which tools don't currently serve tribes well, or which can be kind of enhanced or scaled up. So it's sort of this inventory taking of what exists today in terms of solutions. And then there was another sort of inventory taking of data gaps and needs, something that I've had started in my work, but I'm imagining others have too. And so for those kinds of things, I thought, well, this is great. This is right up our alley, because I think the brain trust coming together here can help do that inventory better than I can do on my own. And so what I thought we could do is just in this same file, start inventorying those things. So we have, this data solutions tab where we come across things that we're aware of that we think are meeting some portion of the need. And then a column here where we can continue to talk about sort of outstanding, limitations or what might be needed to enhance those existing tools. And then here's sort of blank for now. I have begun sort of as a sample, just filling in, but data gaps. And this, we could either do this maybe tediously, homework style, or we can use this as a home for as we come across things to continually place things on a list so that we are tracking them. And I see my role as being, helping to sort of manage and compile, and then hoping that you guys can assist where you have information. And then, so what else came up at the last meeting was to encourage data and tool makers to serve tribes better. And so that may mean where we do identify tools that aren't serving tribes, that we actually do some level of engagement with them. So say maybe they're already in this group and they're super open to doing things better, and we have some suggestions for them, we just discuss it. Or they're not, and they're harder to engage with, but maybe a subset of us either talk with them directly, send a set of recommendations. And then Dorette, I think, mentioned also maybe coming up with a set of use cases for, I think, and maybe you want to expand on that a little bit more, Dorette, but use cases, I think, meaning how a tribe could potentially better use a data set or a data tool that exists.
Yes, and examples of how they have used them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then this last one here being guiding agencies and toolmakers on how to consult and engage with tribes, which honestly, that's happening. That need is so pervasive in my world right now that everybody, every agency seemingly wants to hear from tribes, wants to better engage with them, is asking how, and it's just, it's kind of overwhelming, I think, for tribes. And so we should talk about that. We should talk about whether there's some kind of guidance we are able to offer, or some sort of liaising we are able to offer. So that's that first goal. And I want to stop there before we kind of run through this second one here, just to ask for input and comments.
I have a comment on the guide agencies. I agree that's really needed. I'd like to see something that addresses Public Record Act requests and how agencies should handle Public Record Act requests that deal with tribal data. I know that at Cal EPA, each board and department does it differently, and that just can't be. And also something that talks about data sovereignty and how, get in front of the state agencies. So we're not telling tribes how to behave. The tribes are telling us how to behave. Same with the waivers for sovereign immunity. I don't know if you saw it in the chat. When one of the, I think it was on the limitations thing, groundwater was there. My concern with that is how do we document things like that that could be sensitive to tribes? Because we don't want to end up collecting data or documentation that could inadvertently damage a tribe.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that one specifically, because Shasta and I talked a little bit after our last meeting. We're not sure we're the best position to do the really rigorous Indigenous data sovereignty work that is being done by others, but we think it's an important factor of what we are trying to do, which is to sort of obtain external information in ways that are easier. And that's where I think the overlap is where there is data that may not necessarily be accessible publicly now that would be helpful for tribes to access, but by making it publicly accessible, there are sensitivities and potential damage to tribes. So yeah, I think you've nailed, like, groundwater is a good one. And maybe reasons why certain data doesn't exist.
And this is Chaz, and related to the first bullet point in your objectives for goal 1, you talk about identifying key tools and solutions. And it seems to me that if we were to go to that step to identify the tools and solutions, that it would be nice if we created a website that had links to each of them. The start of a place where people could go to try to find different tools available that relate to tribal health and climate.
And probably the website, administered by Paula, the tribalclimatehealth.org website is a place to do it. We are doing it. We have a resource clearinghouse that allows us to do some of that. But yeah, if there's other better places for it too. But yeah, I agree. Once we compile it, we should make it available.
Yeah, that just might be something you add to the bullet point list just so that it is documented. Even it sounds like you're already doing it, so.
Yes, I like it.
This may or may not, this is Doug Cluck. This may or may not be helpful, but I wrote a little bit about the climate resilience toolkit, which not the last administration, but the one before that, directed us to put together. I'm a Fed, so I work for NOAA. Directed us to put together to collect all the different craziness going on in terms of the federal side of the house in regards to resilience, adaptation, and examples. There is a tribal section on there. I'm not an expert in it, but I will say that a number of really good examples and maybe guideposts, if you will, that would help tribes get an idea of what other tribes have done are on there. And so the other thing it's supposed to do is if this group, for example, or Angie's smaller group creates something, it would also be put on this climate resilience toolkit for everyone else to see. So it's a way of spreading the word around of what you want to spread around. In other words, not sensitive information at all. No, it would only be what a particular tribe what would like to share, for example. And a lot of the BIA resilience grant endeavors kind of go down this in some cases.
Yeah, I use it all the time. It's certainly on our resource clearinghouse. And then I'm just thinking about maybe our language will need clarification at some point. I do think of it, the toolkit, as a solution. Thank you for adding it to the list. And then I think maybe we need to differentiate between what's just like a data set versus a solution. Because I think there's tens of thousands of data sets that I wouldn't necessarily qualify as a solution to data, to tribal resilience data accessibility. Right. So, okay. And so, for example, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's a common problem for many communities.
Yeah.
Tribal and otherwise, to find data that help them do anything from writing a grant to actually solving a very particular problem. What I will share with you is from my little perspective, that we in NOAA collect incredible amounts of climate information from around the world. All right. And there are data sites that you may or may not know about. Now, when I talk about data, I'm talking about the stuff that is collected at a instrument, like the wind speed or temperature or precipitation. I'm also talking about satellite and let's see, what else could I say? Satellite and radar data and all that other sort of hard science. I don't know how else to say it. Hard science climate data. You guys have so many other needs in terms of health data, which we don't collect, but related to climate, which that's why I'm sort of listening to hear what direction you're going in terms of an environment. And when I say an ecosystem type stuff, we're not such big collectors of that. It's the hard physical science stuff that we have online and anybody can access at any time. But I understand also that's not straightforward. I get that. So there are people who I could give you a phone number of our call-in number if people want to download a data set. Now, what you're going to do with that, I don't know. But that would be a different discussion. I'll just put it that way.
Totally, yeah. I've put my head in a space for so long that where it has landed in terms of what's meaningful to focus on is not all the hard science that exists out there, but what's there that answers specific questions that are meaningful to tribes and is analyzed to enough extent that it can be useful to make decisions with. So it meets an indicator that's useful for better understanding exposures and impacts or population sensitivity and adaptive capacity. It helps us understand, like fill in some information that helps us make decisions. And it's not so technical, so academic that it's not usable. It's not able to, it would require a lot of work to be interpreted. So there's these different like boxes forming in my mind. There's solutions, which might be more like trying to aggregate some of this information for tribes in a way that's more user friendly. And then there's the inventory that I've been working on for a while with the easy tool, which is inventorying all of the what I consider to be best, most community user friendly data sets and tools that are out there. And so I'm trying to figure out how to organize that without duplicating those efforts and maybe just organizing it properly, if that makes sense. So, and I'll just end that thought by saying what I have here under data solutions is intended to be more of the aggregate tool kind of thing. But if you all would like, I can also make accessible what I have through the easy tool in terms of the inventory I have taken with the indicators and data sources that I have found to be sort of best practices to date. It is accessible. You can take it right now, but in terms of getting you the brain trust thoughts around adding to it or improving it, I can make that part of all of this as well. It's just overwhelming. So anybody else have thoughts here on goal number 1 and sort of how we actualize it? So I think inventories and at some point engaging with agencies doing this stuff where we think we can maybe help them do it better for tribes. And then the second one here is foster collaborative tribal resilience data access solutions, desired outcome, basically being around, the conversations we had last time was, we don't want to duplicate efforts. We do want to, use resources efficiently, not continue the bifurcation, the fragmentation of all this even further. And so what we said last time was we wanted to outline key partners and ally coalitions. We wanted to identify others to invite to this group. We want to potentially develop an advisory group comprised of tribal representatives, maybe that are compensated to provide input to agencies making solutions, so maybe not, they may have issues. And then consider collaborations amongst members and partners. If something comes along where we actually want to do a project together, and that was sort of the nod to, we have limited resource in terms of our facilitation of this group. That doesn't necessarily mean building out a brand new tool, but if there are partnerships that want to form within this group, that could be helpful. How does that one sit with you all? Does that sound like what we talked about, and what's missing?
Angie, as you were speaking, and I'm thinking back to the first goal that we talked about, and it might also relate here to the second one, but I do know of some entities and other groups that are doing similar things. Somewhere in there, maybe we should try to crosswalk, try to identify other groups that are doing what we perceive to be complementary activities.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. And so I have this just blank inventory sort of set up here for agencies and allies. So this can be where we're plopping, you know, maybe we come across an agency that we want to be, you know, we want to engage with at some point, that is doing part of a bit of this work. We want to engage them to do more of it. Or maybe a group that is doing exactly what we are doing, and we want to, you know, we want to consider them an ally, or we just want to be aware of them so that we don't do what they're doing, right? That was kind of what Tom was saying last time. So I feel like this can be a place to drop that, you know, where we are aware of them. Let's look and see what's out there. So I would welcome all of you that want to do that to do that.
Great, thank you.
So, right, so now we have places, right? We have places to identify tools and solutions, data gaps. So that's this guy, right? Which this could take, we could spend 10 hours a day for 10 years on this one alone, I feel like, but you may already be aware. So we can start dropping those in as we are aware of them. I think this could be a really good full meeting just devoted to gaps and what we know about and how we can flush this list out. This would be something that I think could turn into a deliverable that can be written up in a way that is presented as a set of recommendations to agencies that are trying to tackle this. Okay, so yeah, we have a place to put agencies and allies, data gaps, data solutions, and then our members and anybody else. So that's still here, the member directory, and anybody else that we may want to include. And the last thing here is relevant resources, where a lot of folks put some stuff in the chat box last time, and all I've done is drop the links here, which eventually I'll go through and flesh this rest of this part out so that we can just keep track of when there are resources that we think are applicable. Okay, any other comments on this goal or what's in the tabs?
Hey, Angie, this is Tom. And as you were talking, you had said something about perhaps one day doing a project. And now I've kind of missed, I thought I saw that and the objectives are somewhere, but I kind of, what are you thinking about a project? There it is. Is that it?
Yeah.
What do you mean by project? Like, I don't suppose this group would go into a community and try to do something that way, but what type idea? I have one idea of what a project could be, but I wanted to hear more of what you're talking about, or is that also an objective of the grant that you and SASA have to actually do a project, or could that be a future, or what are you thinking about that before I go forward and share some ideas?
It doesn't have to happen at all. I feel like it's probably just like a natural organic thing that may happen as we continue to get to know each other and our knowledge and assets and solutions, right? So, and then something comes along and we're like, hey, you have a piece of this puzzle. We have a piece of this puzzle. What if we try to solve this missing link together? And so, it's things like the University of Washington has their tribal climate tool it's only available in the Pacific Northwest or maybe only to Washington tribes. I'd actually like for them to speak in one of the next couple of months meetings. You know, is there a way to expand that to more states, that kind of thing?
Okay. Well, one thing I was thinking, and it's just it's on a tangent, so I don't need to go there. We got a speaker to get to, but perhaps one way we could think of a project is, after we pull a lot of these things together and we have these connections with all these different groups across the country, perhaps one logical step is to ball that together into some sort of a training program. So you actually, the project would be to deliver a training and put that out there. You know, you've got a bunch of experts, you've got all this data that you know where it is, take it on the road and do something more than just a webinar with a small group, but actually try to, you know, put something out there, a PowerPoint, you know, a cadre of speakers that can cover the floor of all the subject matter. That might be the project, a logical next step for a quote unquote project, where you're not actually getting into a community, and it could be a training for a community that's trying to launch something, trying to launch their own health climate assessment. And you could come in as the trainers to get them energized and give them all the right tools that fit exactly their situation. So it could be something like that, or it could be national.
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to ease the burden. You know, we're in that space, so are some of you in the training space. And I guess we arrived here because we thought you can only train so much. And this is so complicated that then there's this role of tangible tools and, you know, this aggregation of data in ways that you can't just talk about, right? Like there's a work behind it. But yeah, I think that's a possibility. Sure, we could definitely, there's lots of ways to collaborate. So I'm not going to put a lid around it. It's just like what organically will come out of this group once we learn more about what we're each working on. Thank you, Tom.
Question. This is Isabel. I joined a little late. Sorry about that. Has anyone been working with the Tribal GIS program or the tribal resources that Esri has?
Does anybody else have any experience they want to share?
I'm pretty involved in Tribal GIS. I serve on their education work group and help plan their conference every year. I am not engaged with this type of effort, no, not at this point.
Just wondering, because I see quite a bit of stuff on their website, and I know they're always interested in collaborating with people on a variety of topics. So I wondered if anyone was using them as a tool or a data source.
Well,
I think on the tribal side, yes, right? So housing our own data and protection of that data and using GIS. We did a tribal health training that we brought in Angie, and we did a GIS activity to do some mapping and spatial analysis of some health data in our training. And so, yes, there's.
Okay. And the question that has occasionally occurred to me, because I do work with their non-standard market data as a broader thing, is that, and I don't know if it passes the giggle test, but I've always wondered. Often we'll look at their market potential data, and you can get that at different levels, you know, down to the census block level, and it might be, you know, someone who's taking asthma medication. There are a number of variables that they have in their market research that, and you can actually aggregate by tribal areas. Not that necessarily someone would want to do that. And I've often wondered, well, would that even pass the giggle test? I mean, you know, if you look at smoking or, you know, would that, has anyone looked at that? Because it might be something like, you know, no, you really can't, because it's not at the, it's only at the adult or household level. It is not broken out by race, ethnicity, or anything like that. We sometimes use it as to answer questions broadly at the population. And so I was just wondering, you know, relevant is their data at that level, at the level of, a tribal area, even though it's, it's all adults. So it isn't necessarily any particular tribe, although, if you're in the area, that might be, but that might be something to look at. And I just have go ahead.
I think it's worth throwing on the potential solutions tab. It was because of April that I came across it recently, because they did a lot of work for tribes during COVID. And I just put in the chat, we published a report trying to translate COVID lessons into climate preparation for Indian country. And we're sort of posing the question about, to what extent can this infrastructure of tribes working more closely with tribal GIS through COVID, can that be sort of fortified and useful for climate preparation? So I think there's potential there.
They have a lot of questions. It might be worth looking at and pulling it. I mean, if somebody wanted to say, oh, you know what, let me look at it for the local area or a small area, that's something I could do, it pull and push at someone just to look at it and say, you know what, this bears no resemblance to our population whatsoever. Or maybe there are some things that would be useful.
Okay. Well, I think this has been a really useful conversation. So I would welcome you all to, if you'd like, spend a little bit more time on this first tab. Whoops, which I dragged over for some reason. This first tab, if you can, and if you have better wording or disagreement, or just feel like something major is missing, let's talk about it at our next meeting. So you can spend a little time with it. We'll chat about it again. And I actually think what we might like to do at our next meeting is kind of pick one of these tabs to really dive into a little bit more. And then as we go, I'm going to leave this here, support better protection of tribal data, because it seems important and I'm not sure what our role in it is yet. So let's just kind of sit with it. Okay, so with that, thank you so much for a good conversation. I want to welcome our guests, and so we do have, I think some of you had to leave at 12, but we have y'all, at least we had an hour and a half set aside. Jessica Cahill from Azavea is going to talk to us about their Temperate adaptation planning tool. And full disclosure, I have worked with Jessica in the past on some things, especially in California, and she's great. So she's going to spend about 10 minutes explaining, kind of demoing her tool, explaining what the tool does, and then we get another 10 minutes or so to have a discussion where you can provide ideas, you can ask questions, you can share thoughts. Okay, so I'll leave it up to you, Jessica, and I think I may need to add you as a organizer, so give me just a sec.
Great, thanks, Angie, and thanks for that introduction. While you're doing that, I'll just say that I think this conversation is really important, because I think there's a big difference between data sets and solutions, and I would not even go so far as to say that Temperate is a solution. We call it a decision support tool. I don't think it's a solution. I think it is potentially just a way to get to the solution. But one of the things that we do somewhat differently is put the data that we have, which is mostly temperature and precipitation, which you'll see in just a moment, into the context of the questions that people have to answer. So we're really trying to make sure that people are really grounded in the decisions that they have to make before looking at the data, because data can be incredibly overwhelming and there's a lot of it. So I think it's a complex space. So you should be seeing my screen right now. Okay, yes, great. So I'm just going to run you through Temperate really quickly. So my login has kind of super user permissions, but it's super easy to get in. I'm just going to pick a random location in California. And one of the reasons that I'm picking California is because, as Angie said, we had the pleasure of working together a couple years ago now to expand the original version of Temperate, which was limited to about 1,000 communities, to the entire US. And we focused very specifically on tribal, rural, and hard to reach communities. And Angie actually helped us pare down the types of data sets that would be most applicable to them. And where it happened to have the most impact was California, because there's so much data available. So I'm just going to show you that real quick. So getting in is really easy. You can pick any area within the United States. We do actually have global data, but this tool is very specific to the US. So one of the things that we did was we added both the county outlines and the tribal areas. I believe that this is limited to the federally recognized tribal areas, but you can see on a map, if I zoom out just enough, all of these green areas are the tribal communities that you can see. And if I scroll out very far, you can see all of the tribal communities throughout the United States.
Or at least federally recognized reservations.
Correct, yes, federally recognized, thank you. But one of the things that we wanted to do is, you'll see here is please create a region that's under 10,000 square miles. We knew that not all of the planning happens at the city level or at the county level. Sometimes it's multi-county, sometimes it's multi-metro, sometimes it's a whole region, and we wanted to enable that. So I'm just going to go back to using Fresno as an example, just because it'll have some interesting data later on. But the goal is pretty much to create what one of our users calls the equivalent of TurboTax for a vulnerability assessment. So just like in TurboTax, you go in, you pick which tax year you're filing for, and then the application walks you through a series of questions that you have to answer. So the first thing that we're doing is actually not questions, it's information. So what we are doing is taking the National Climate Assessment, and based on the region selected, so in this case, Fresno, California, we are saying we're not showing you any other data other than the data that is relevant to Fresno from now on. So we're looking at what we call your top hazards. These are certainly potential top hazards that you have the most exposure to. They are certainly not meant to be prescriptive. We absolutely acknowledge that no one knows the communities like the people living in those communities. So we're just trying to give a little bit of a kickstart or a head start into kind of sifting through all of the morass and finding the most important things. So you'll see there's kind of these cards here, and this data is actually specific to Fresno. So if I take a really quick look at this, I'm seeing more groundwater flooding, many more heat waves, more intense rainstorms, less drought, and fewer cold days, which makes sense. You can remove these, you can add additional ones. So we have a whole bunch of additional hazards. These hazards are based on the standards that are kind of adhered to or used by the CDP and the Global Covenant of Mayors. So we're trying to use the standards that they have there. So if you have additional pieces that you wanted to look at that we might not necessarily have data for, but you want to add them to your vulnerability assessment, you certainly can. So maybe reduced snowpack is something that we wanted to look at, or vector-borne disease. So what you've done is just kind of chosen the types of hazards that you're going to focus on. Certainly not the end-all be-all, but the types of things that you're going to start with. And then, because so many of the people that we talk to wear multiple hats, we know that some people need to look at it from a certain lens. So maybe you are working in an emergency services department and you need to look at all of this through that lens, or you are in a public health department and you need to look at it through the public health lens. So I'm just going to pick public health and water, and I'm going to go ahead and complete the setup of the plan. Now, what that does behind the scenes is just pair up the hazards that we selected with the community systems that we selected. And I'm certainly not going to go through all of this because I only have about 5 more minutes for this quick overview before we go into questions, but there are a couple things that I wanted to show you. So there's kind of 2 paths here: vulnerability assessment and adaptation planning. The vulnerability assessment piece is pretty straightforward. So you're looking at drought and its impact on public health, wastewater, stormwater management, and water supply. And you go in and you hit assess, and it takes you through these 5 steps. The steps 2 through 4 are really the meat of it, right? So the first one is just kind of restating what you're looking at specifically. So you're not thinking about drought in all of its complexity and all of its impacts. You're thinking about drought specifically on public health. And then this is where we kind of introduce the data. So how are you going to answer these questions? What's the probability, the frequency, and the intensity of these things? So we're putting the data within that context. So let's look at dry spells, which I think this one said there was going to be fewer of. One of the things that you'll notice is that we have 2 data sets. The LOCA data set is specifically downscaled for the continental United States. The next GDP is a global data set, and we have all of the available models. Now, if you're in California and you're familiar with CalAdapt, there are a certain set of models that CalAdapt kind of defaults to and that you all should be using. So you can kind of clear all these models and use those 5, or you can average all of them. And I'll show you what that looks like when you do average all of them. So in this high emissions scenario, which is RCP 8.5, we're looking at 2015 to 2030. So that's a very near term. You can certainly see more dates. You can go all the way back to 1950 and all the way out to 2100 if you'd like. But we're trying to focus on kind of what you can kind of see and plan for in the very near future. This kind of dark green line is the average of all of the models, but you'll see the shaded area shows you kind of the ups and downs of all of the different models. So this line here is the average, but there are definitely some models that are predicting more or less in this period. So we wanted to put all of the data kind of right out there. If you go back here, I can actually just jump to another data set, which is where Angie was really instrumental. We decided that we needed some map data to help organizations kind of put this into perspective. So we picked a few things like air quality, ozone, and I should mention that we are not data providers. I think we would fall under what we've been talking about today as a tool provider. So Azavea as an organization is predominantly a professional services software engineering firm, but we do have some products, and this is one of them. So we're not producing any of this data. This you can actually see comes from Cal EnviroScreen, and we have a link out to Cal EnviroScreen as well. But you can see here that in terms of air quality, Fresno is not so great. You can also zoom out and kind of see the rest of the state and how it's going to fare in comparison to the rest of the state. But this kind of inland area is particularly vulnerable to low air quality. And we did have one other air quality measure. This was also from Cal EnviroScreen. So this is PM 2.5, which is particulate matter. It makes sense that these two would be correlated together. They have a lot of overlap. We also have drinking water contaminants, also coming from Cal EnviroScreen. Unfortunately, Fresno is still in this dark purple, in a lot of trouble kind of color. And number of extreme precipitation days. This one they don't look so bad on, actually. They're not predicted to see too much extreme precipitation. But wildfire, however, let's see how they do. Too bad, actually. And this one is coming from the Rocky Mountain Research Station. So that is my time. So I'm going to wrap it up real quick and we can move on to questions. But so my point was actually that we are trying to put all of this data into context. You can actually get to the climate related data and the map data from this tab right here. But just real quick, if I kind of blow through one of these in a very, very quick way, let's just say, probability is high, they are going to be more frequent and more intense. And I'm going to say that the potential impact, just to be an extreme example, is pretty high. We do provide a couple examples of what the potential impact might be, what the potential effects might be. But we certainly encourage everyone to kind of think through the details of how this is going to impact your community specifically. And then there are things that unfortunately we can't give you any data sets to help you answer, like adaptive capacity. How able is your community to actually make some changes? So just for an extreme example, I'm going to say it's very low, and it's because of access to basic services and budgetary capacity, but I can put anything in here that I'd like. And then I'm on to review. So this is not an in-depth assessment by any means, but it is a Kickstarter. And what you'll see here is that we're trying to give visual cues in terms of the adaptive need. So we're just taking what you entered for potential impact and adaptive capacity, putting them together and saying anything in the kind of darker orange, bright red category is something that you're likely going to want to prioritize a little bit higher and address sooner rather than later, as opposed to something that you have some ability to address or has relatively low impact. That's going to be in the lighter orange or the yellow areas. So if you imagine all three of these have these colored squares, you can see quite easily what your priority might be. And if you go back to the dashboard, if you imagine that each of these has a colored square, you can see how you might want to prioritize accordingly. So I'm going to stop there, which is the super quick version, but I'd love to answer any questions that you all might have.
Thank you, Jessica. I want to open it up to the crowd, but also say you can see the beauty of having somebody with user design doing this work, understands the science and psychology of human decision making and how to walk people through it, which, you know, my little Excel tool doesn't have that. So who has questions? Well, while you all are thinking, why don't I ask a question? Jessica, why don't you tell us just what's on your wish list? What do you want to do next with this tool, and what do you wish it could do now?
Well, you know the answer to some of those questions because you know that I have an incredibly long wish list. First on my wish list, just to be completely frank, is that this right now is a paid tool. It's $1,500 a year for a subscription, which, and we're very open to kind of providing a sliding scale sort of fee. But really what we're trying to do is cover our hosting costs. This is not funded by anything right now. This was the original development was funded by the US Department of Energy and then the US Department of Agriculture. However, this is something that we're bootstrapping. So our monthly hosting costs are more than a subscription cost for one person per month. So we're simply trying to kind of keep the lights on, so to speak. I would like to get underwriting so that I can make this free for everyone. That is my ultimate goal. And I'm hopeful that with the new administration and some of the recommendations that the Biden administration has made, that might actually be possible in some way, shape, or form. There are a number of other data sets that I want to incorporate. I showed you an example of California because we were able to find a number of those things that were readily available. But Angie, in your research, you identified a whole host of other data sets that we could incorporate. They're in inaccessible formats. Most of them are in PDFs. Some of them are not available via API or even CSV downloads, and they're just incredibly hard to wrangle. And I would love to get funding to just basically wrangle them and get them in here in a format that people can use and is kind of readily accessible.
Lori has a question.
Sure.
I love your tool. I think it's really cool. I'd love to play with it at some point. What have you seen, because I'm sure you've seen something, where somebody is using your tool and you say, oh my God, don't use it for that?
I think one of the things, I haven't so much seen, oh my God, don't use it for that. What I have seen is you don't have everything I need, which is absolutely fair. Most of this data is temperature and precipitation related. So a lot of the things that people need, like groundwater level, water supply, vulnerable populations, that's not something that we have in here and is also on my wish list. I have talked to certain communities where we only have data available at either like the state or the county level, and they want more granular data. So my recommendation is always to go to kind of the level of data that you need. So we've been really careful to kind of not misrepresent anything that we don't really know. So I haven't heard anyone saying, oh my God, don't use it for that. I've definitely heard people say like, it would be great if you also had this. I've also heard people say, you know, like, I need my state's resources available in here too, which I think is particularly important in places like California, where there are so many resources available. CalAdapt is an amazing tool, but not all states are that prepared, unfortunately.
Yeah, and just information, I think I'm from WEHA and we do CalEnviro screen, and we understand its limitations as far as tribes go. One of the things we're hoping to do soon is to make it so, as far as funding goes, all tribes are considered vulnerable communities. So that may impact you at some point or another.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. I'd be happy to, I should say this for everyone, I'd be happy to kind of do a more in-depth demo for any of you, or kind of, you know, give you a whirlwind tour one-on-one at any point.
Cool, thank you.
Are there other questions, or even, you know, this is meant to be think tank style, meaning what do you see here? Have you seen this done elsewhere in different ways? It's interesting. Do you have ideas or ways, you know, how would you enhance this tool? What's missing? Jessica's heard from me, because I've really dove in, the things that my wish list for this tool. And I just feel like you know, the world's our oyster.
Yeah, this is Chaz. I would think that, so I just went to your website, and it seems that on your homepage, or it'd be nice if you had some examples of the outputs. I see the it's not clear to me if you get a PDF with the entire adaptation plan, or like exactly what you would be getting. So that's something helpful.
Yeah, it's a good point. We do, it's not on, I don't think it's on this site. We do have a blog that links to Blacksburg, Virginia's use of Temperate, which they used it in their update to their first vulnerability assessment, and now they're using it again to their second update. So that's the most concrete example that we have. But to answer your question about what you get all of the charts and graphs. You can download them all separately. And you can download a CSV of everything that you've entered. And the reason for a CSV is because originally what we were hoping to do was create a connection between Temperate and this CDP reporting tool, so that you could literally just say export to CDP and then have it go over. So it had to be a machine readable format, is what I'm saying.
Sure, that makes sense.
But let me see if I can find that blog that I was talking about really quickly. Here we go. Yeah. See, Carol from Blacksburg, Virginia is the one who calls it TurboTax, and I use this pretty frequently. I will put this link in the chat if I can pull up that bar again.
Are there other questions for Jessica?
I have another wish for it.
Yeah.
I know, and the tool couldn't create this, but it could prompt a tribe to, you know, list indicator species that the tribe already knows of, so that they're considering impacts on those species. Because a lot of the tribes, I mean, Karuk, for example, has had many indicator species that they've had since time immemorial. that they have stories about and how the weather impacts those species. And so just reminding tribes to look at their own knowledge and not just focus externally, I think might be helpful.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jessica and I have had those conversations because that's, you know, and the easy tool because it's built like a worksheet is a place to also add where you're gathering internal information as well. But it's, you know, the ugly Excel thing. It's easy to drop in whatever you want. But yeah, every tribe I've ever worked with is using some kind of braided approach with Western and Indigenous science and local observation, traditional knowledges, and there just needs to be space for it. Jessica knows it's on our wish list, right?
Absolutely.
And this tool, I haven't used it, but it looks so approachable. Like it looks like I don't need to be a PhD statistician to use this tool.
That's exactly right. And that was incredibly intentional. One of the things that we heard before we even started to embark on this, because our original work was, I mean, we're a software engineering firm. The original thing that we did was build an API and a whole bunch of charts and graphs, because that's kind of, you know, within our wheelhouse. And then I went out and I talked to a bunch of people and they're like, I can't use this. I don't know what to do with this. So I was like, oh, okay. So we interviewed a lot of people and they were like, look, there's so much, I don't know where to start. I don't know what's the most important thing. And it's really overwhelming. And every time I open it up, or, you know, like I open up this data set or I do some Google searches, like I just have to shut my computer down because I don't know what to do. So we really tried very hard to create an interface that was somewhat warm and inviting. I didn't get to the end, but we have like, congratulations, you made it, and kind of, you know, supportive messages. So that was super intentional, and I'm glad that it came through.
Yeah, it looks beautiful. I mean, I'd want to click.
Hey, Jessica, you mentioned that this is not the solution. So what is the solution?
Ideally, if I had all of the money and time in the world, the solution would be a curated list of data sources that I see specific to my area. So if I've typed in Fresno, California here, all of the kind of climate data that I have access to would not only be the temperature and precipitation related data that you see here, but it would be all of the other data sets out there, you know, all of the NOAA data catalogs, all of the California specific catalogs. It would be not a clearinghouse of data sets, but a very specific curated portal for your location. That is what I would love. And the other side of it, which I think is actually really coming online now, is there's a lot of work that I'm involved in and that others are involved in terms of creating a shared knowledge set of actions and strategies that people are using. So that's the other piece of this, where we actually have a whole list of adaptation plan actions and strategies that other communities have adopted that you can borrow from. So the idea is to kind of accelerate learning. So you can see they're a little outdated at this point, but we have Santa Cruz's plan from 2011, Boulder's plan from 2012. These are all regionally specific. These all seem to, and Flagstaff's plan from 2012. So you can kind of see what people in the region facing the same sorts of issues might have done, and then you can tailor it for your community. I'm involved in an effort that's going to put together a database like that will be freely available. And Temperate would then become a user of that database, but that database will just be free and open. And I think that's one great next step, because I think it's the soup to nuts solution that you need, right? You need to do the vulnerability assessment. There's a piece missing in the middle in terms of how do I get funding to actually create some of these action plans, and then how do I implement the action plans? And that's a whole other initiative that I'm working on with other folks. So I think it's understanding all of the different stages of the process of what a community needs to go through, and basically creating easy and accessible tools for each of those steps and making it discoverable. There are so many tools out there people just don't know where to start, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't know where to start either. There's so much out there.
Jessica, do you want to share a little? I know you're working with the Climate Explorer a bit too. Do you want to share any of that? So, I know folks are probably not, because they're not familiar with your tool, thinking, oh, are you duplicating efforts with some of the other things that are happening federally? But nope, you're working alongside.
We are. Thank you for bringing that up. And I was so glad that the Climate Resilience Toolkit actually came up before. The top hazards feature that I showed you, so as soon as you log in, this is a new interface for me. Hang on one second. As soon as you log in, it had those 5 cards that had your potential top hazards. That got integrated into the Climate Explorer. I don't know why I can't hear. Well, we'll just do this. This, why can't I find what I'm looking for? This will not bring me back to what I am used to. Sorry about that. But on the Climate Explorer, if I can find it while I'm talking about it, there's a tab that says ready to take the next step. So there's a whole bunch of information about all of the data that's available. And then there's a ready to take the next step piece, and the top hazards feature from Temperate is actually right there, and it's really fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, awesome. Anybody else have questions or ideas for Jessica? Well, so this is all being recorded. We're going to share this meeting recording with the rest of the group as well. So who knows, you may end up hearing from others. And just, from my perspective, Paula also received a BIA Tribal Resilience Grant to do a second wave of that intertribal resilience data development project. So the first one, I think I mentioned last time, we did it in San Diego. We, one of the perks of participating was to get a subscription for a year to the Temperate tool. And part of the goal of that was because Jessica had just launched all these enhancements for tribes in California. We're sort of testing and tinkering around with it. And then it was helping us better understand, we're trying to better understand the data gaps question. Where are the data gaps? Where do they remain? And so we're going to do that again in Southern California with another 6 tribes. That's just kicking off here. And so we continue to use the Temperate tool, and I have to say, Temperate's one of many tools that I still find myself needing to use when I have to actually complete a vulnerability study or assessment that really answers the question. So it's super helpful, and I wish there was 18,000 more data points in there that were visually pleasing and displayed in a way that I could easily use. And I guess we'll just have to get there. So everybody, thank you so much for spending time on that. Jessica, do you have any last final words? Okay.
No, just
Hey, Angie.
Yes.
I had one thought, and it might be a thought that comes from ignorance as much as it is a question for Jessica to change or fix. But one thing I see with a lot of the models, like I'm from California. I live in an area that's heavily forested, mountain, prone to fire. Okay, and when I go to CalAdapt, which I understand was built not so much for the public but for government, and I was kind of dismayed because we need tools for the public. The public wants to know this stuff as much as you have some county board of supervisors doing some vulnerability assessment. People that are living in risky areas want to know that themselves. And a lot of times they're not going to go to their elected officials. So I go, for example, to CalAdapt, and I see that I'm in a medium tier 2 fire risk. Now I know that that's wrong. I know that I was about 5 miles away from the biggest fire ever in California, the August fire. I know that an area about a mile from my home burned intensely about 20 years ago and is probably going to burn pretty good in the next 5 years. But if I go to CalAdapt, it says, you're medium. Not a big fire risk there. And I know the reality from living here, that's wrong. Now, it might be that the model, and that's what they've also said, the model is not granular enough to deal with parcel level specifics. But as a person of the public, I want to know about my home. I want to know about my risk. Greedy, selfish. I don't care about my neighbor. I want to hear about what's my risk. And that also goes to like funding. If I want to get my CAL FIRE funds to clean my forest up, they might say you're not a high priority because CalAdapt says you're only medium. I'm wondering in all these models, and this goes to the question, and this is the naivety, you got models that talk about the future and give me ideas about what is my risk, but is there anybody ever collecting then the actual fires that burned in a given year, plugging those back into the models, or having two models, one that shows real time and one that gives you a prediction, and then comparing those two? But I guess in the end of the day, besides that question that kind of is frustrating, I think we should be looking, and I'm not saying we as this group, but in general, we should be thinking about solving these problems from a community level down to a property level or an individual level, because that's where the rubber hits the road. As a person who owns land or has property, I worry about what is my risk? What is my family's risk? That sounds selfish, but I think that's the way a lot of people in America think. And we should deliver a tool that addresses that sort of attitude, or we're going to miss a lot of people in getting on board with making the changes that need to be made. So I'm not sure if that's a question or not, Jessica, but that's what's on my mind.
I think you're exactly right. One of the very early tools that we built that we subsequently scrapped was the future feels like. And it was very much, tell us exactly where your home is, and we'll tell you what the temperature there is going to be in 50 years. So in Philadelphia, in 50 years, it's going to feel like Tijuana. And we would give the temperature differential. So I think that getting to a place where people have a real palpable sense of what the future is going to bring, or even like what's their risk and exposure right now, is absolutely how to change behaviors. As everyday citizens, we vote with our dollars, and there are a lot of ways that we can change things. Wildfires is a little bit harder because obviously your land is connected to everybody else's land. Same problem with water. Your water has upstream and downstream implications. So it's more of a holistic solution. And clearly you're not in Fresno because I don't think this is what your map would look like. But the wildfirerisk.org is a great tool. I would say that it is backed by one of the better scientific minds, because Headwaters Economics, so Azavea, full disclosure, Azavea built this site for Headwaters Economics, who built it for the US Forest Service. The data that we used came from Pyrologics, which absolutely does what's called hindcasting, which is, all right, I take my model and I say what it's going to look like for the next 20 years. And then over that 20 years, I collect the data about what actually happens and I correct my model based on that. So I know that many different agencies, NOAA in particular, does a lot of hindcasting specifically with their water models and the national water model. So hindcasting is a big part of it. I haven't necessarily seen them kind of publish that difference, like how wrong was my model and how did the reality impact the changes that we made to the model going forward. I think it's kind of a level of scientific rigor that probably would go over my head, frankly. But I think that is something that would be good to see in terms of transparency. The other thing that I would say, and this isn't necessarily your particular issue, but there are organizations that are really kind of keyed into the fact that I need to give you, the public, information specifically about your home. So I'm going to give you a previous address of mine, not my current address. But you can actually go to this site, floodfactor.com, and see your flood risk. And it is specifically designed for residential areas. So it has a tie-in with both Zillow and Realtor.com, I believe. And you can actually see, yeah, this is in the middle of the city, so minimal flood risk. But you can imagine what it might be like for a different area. You can see all of the different, the scores, historic flooding, flood depth, environmental changes. If I picked something more coastal, obviously that would be a little bit different. And then personal solutions. What do I do about this? Which I think is really, what everybody wants to know. How do I react to this? What of this can I control and make decisions about? And some of it is going to be contacting your city officials, right? Like you have to get to the legislator to kind of lift it up a bit, but what can you do with your own space and your own property and your own land? And there are a number of suggestions here that I think are really good. Again, this is a bad example because it's in the middle of a city, but you can imagine the impact of this sort of a tool. And I can drop this in the chat as well.
I think it's, I think 427 is also trying to figure this out. I want to say a big report came out recently where a big online real estate company was attempting to add in data, maybe from 427, about climate risk to make it super accessible when people are searching for homes. But this is that might be a whole nother work group. So I feel like the scale we're dealing with in this group is probably tribal community scale. But maybe the conversation around like the ultimate solution is, that the ultimate solution of these tools would be not only do you have at the end of the day an adaptation plan, but you have the ability to now send something out to your community members so they're on board, right? So that they know what it means for them. So you go down even more granularly. It would be amazing. I think I'm going to wrap us up unless anybody else has other comments or questions. I do have one more little slide to get through here. Is that all right, Jessica? Okay. Let me just share my, I was having to remind myself about that organization. Okay, so I just want to chat for a minute about our next meeting, which is on September 8th, and have a little conversation around, for those of you left, agenda. We'll probably do a similar format as today, which is introductions and then member announcements, and then we'll have a speaker. I actually wonder if we need to have just like the sort of second item on the agenda should be sort of our business, right? The work group's business and what's next for us. And so I'm wondering if we should have a conversation about what is the solution, because we've kind of had it in smaller ways, and that could be just a really good way to have this conversation. We write it out. Let's be clear about what we think this ultimate solution really would be to the problem of tribal resilience data access, like what would solve it. Are there other agenda suggestions? Or I am going to reach out to some folks for another solution presenter. So I might either, and Lori, I don't know, I think Walker's on this list. Maybe Calambiro screen would be a good one to share.
Yeah, Walker would be great, or Laura if Walker's not around.
Yeah, and maybe people are familiar, but I feel like this is giving us all a good dose of what's possible and where certain tools are really nailing it, and that, just all the best practices. We're kind of looking at best practices and sort of looking at what's left to resolve here, or where can things be combined, I suppose, or where is this opportunity for alignment and collaboration. Also, yeah, University of Washington's tribal climate tool. I definitely want to get that in front of everybody. I will reach out, and then let's tackle one of those inventories. So what do you guys think? Help me pick. Should we look at data gaps first?
Allies.
Allies, yeah, okay, allies and potential duplicating initiatives. Okay, so in my follow-up email, I'm going to ask folks to help fill that out in advance of our next meeting, and then we'll spend time during the meeting talking about it, and people can fill in more on the spot. Okay, any other comments or questions for the day? You guys are the hardcore ones that stuck around to the very end. I may make these an hour. What do you think?
That sounds good.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna change them to an hour. All right, thank you all. I hope you have a really nice rest of your week.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Angie. Take
Bye.
care,
Have
everyone.
a good one.
Bye-bye.